All right, I shared a story with somebody, old story of mine. I don't exactly remember why it came up the other day, but it kind of tied into what I was going to talk about this morning. And then something else came up just a couple days ago with one of my sisters. So I'm going to start off by telling the story from my sister, and then I'm going to share my story with you. My sister was, there's a chat thing they do online every once in a while, and she was talking about how she was telling a story to one of my sisters, or the group of sisters, or whatever, and one of her kids overheard her telling the story and said, "Now, Mom, I'm a little confused." And she said, "What about?" She said, "I thought you told us that gossip was wrong." And she said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Wasn't the story you just told them gossip?" And she said, "Well, that was my sister's." Oh, so it's not the same thing. This is what the kid asked. So it's not the same thing if you're telling gossip to your family? Don't you hate when you get busted by a kid? I mean, don't you just hate that? It's one thing if an adult comes up and says, "Hey, now, Sean." But when a little kid comes up and puts you in your place, it just hurts. Well, that brings me to my story. It's not that kind of story, but a similar kind of thing. But when my kids were young, and if you're the one, I can't even remember who I told the story to a couple weeks ago, a week and a half ago, so forgive me if you have to hear it again, but they had this family playland that you could go to with your kids. It had those big giant tubes you crawl in, like at McDonald's and all that. But this one had the tubes were a little bit bigger, and they encouraged parents to climb around with their kids in the tubes. I was younger and skinnier back then, so I'm up there, I got my knee pads on, I'm climbing through these tubes, probably for about an hour with my kids. And all of a sudden, I'm going down this one long tube, and this little girl is coming up right behind me. Don't know the kid. She couldn't have been 4 or 5. So I'm thinking, well, I want to get out of her way so she can go play. And there's this big square opening inside these tubes that you can move off to the side and let people by. So I move off. And I sit down in this little cubby hole, expecting this little girl to crawl on by. Instead, she crawls into the tube and she sits down right next to me. I said, "Hi." She said, "Hi." I said, "You having fun?" She says, "Yeah." And then she says, "You know, sometimes when I crawl through these things, my underwear show." I said, "Are my underwear showing?" And she goes, "Yes, but just a little bit." And then she crawled off. Sean, quit playing after that. Because nothing's more embarrassing than for a kid to point out something you're doing wrong, right? I was mortified, I really was. I was done for the day. I went down and told my wife. She goes, "Why aren't you playing?" I told her a story. She laughed hysterically. Point being is, when we get caught, it stinks anyway. We hate to get caught doing something we should. But the reality is, sometimes we need to be caught. This morning we're going to talk about the danger of hypocrisy. We're going to look at just mainly the book of Matthew. I hope you got your Bible open, but PowerPoint should show these. Because there's this interesting thing in the Gospels. Jesus loves to use the word hypocrite. I don't know why. I mean, it's kind of a harsh word, and if you go through the rest of the Bible, you'll find that the word hypocrite in the New Testament really hardly gets used at all. And sometimes we talk about the love of Jesus and the compassion of Jesus and the care and you know, that sweetness of Jesus. But let me tell you, when he is talking about hypocrisy, the kindness kind of goes out the window. Well, for this reason, we need to ask ourselves, why is Jesus so aggressive about the topic of hypocrisy? Well, let me explain to you first the context of what we're going to talk about this morning, and maybe that will help you understand why. The reason is, when Jesus is talking about hypocrisy or calling somebody a hypocrite, it is always somebody that is supposed to be God's people. Always. Somebody that is supposed to be behaving the way they know they should behave, but they're just not. Someone that should be prioritizing in the way a Christian should, but they're not. In some cases in the Gospels, we're talking about the Pharisees, which are still the Jewish group that haven't really evolved to Christianity. But the reality is the expectation is the same. They're supposed to represent God's people, but they don't. So when Jesus comes across people like this, he's not kind anymore. He's not gentle and sweet and compassionate. He's aggressive and forward and forceful. Well, the reality is today, we are the people that are supposed to be God's people. So we don't want Jesus coming at us with this aggressive attitude because we have become the hypocrites. So we're going to go through some of these. There's a number of them, so we're going to kind of go through quickly, but we're going to build up to something at the end I hope that will make the biggest point. Matthew 6:2, it says, "Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward." Now, these first few scriptures, you're going to see Jesus is warning them. Don't be like them. Now, sometimes we don't like to preach that way. Well, some people don't like to preach that. I believe sometimes you got to point the finger. Some of you don't agree with that, but the reality is sometimes we have to warn what is wickedness so that we know what we're not supposed to do. And Jesus does this. Be careful not to be like them. They're supposed to represent God. They're supposed to be doing godly things, but they are not doing godly things. Sometimes we have to draw attention to the evil. But we're not even going to look at them today. We're going to look at us. But these first three, Jesus is saying, don't do that. So the first thing he says, do not do charitable deeds for your own glory. Well, I don't know if you've ever done that. I don't know if you've ever done something and then they waited for the applause or the pat on the back or the appreciation, and when it didn't come, you got angry about it. Boy, I went up, I gave $100, put a new playground out back. Everybody knew I gave $100. I know because I told everybody I did $100 and nobody gave me a thank you card. Now, some of you are grinning, but the sad thing is I've seen people do exactly that conversation. I had a woman one time at a church. They were sewing teddy bears. I know I've shared this story about different teddy bears, but this is one of the things why the teddy bear ministry ended. Ladies were coming together. They were all sewing these little teddy bears. They were stuffing them. They were putting little church logos on them and taking them up to the hospital and giving them little kids. And one day, one of the women came up and says, I don't know what she's getting all the attention for. I sewed more teddy bears than her. Why doesn't somebody... And went on and on about what the church should be doing to recognize her teddy bear skills. Such a big dramatic thing that the teddy bear ministry died. Isn't that sad? So don't do your charitable deeds for the attention. That's not what we're doing these things for. 2 Matthew 6:5, a few verses later says, and when you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. Let me tell you, guys, I'm going to speak mostly to us this morning. We want to give a great prayer, don't we? I mean, we want to be fluid. We want people to not so much be impressed, but we realize we represent the congregation as we go to God in prayer, and we want to sound good. I remember the first prayer I got to lead at Harding in Chapel. 9 a.m. in the morning, I got up. I was so excited. I got up to that microphone and I said, good evening. Only the laughter was much louder, and my friends did not let it go for about 2 months. I'd be at breakfast at 6:30 in the morning and go, good evening, Sean. How you doing? I just wanted to do a good prayer, and I blew it just with the introduction. But how many times do we get up there and we get so caught up in how we sound and how good it is, and we ramble on and we go on, and the reality is, why? When I teach young men to pray and you get them to say that very first prayer, do you know what I say? Don't worry about being fancy. Just pray for what we're doing. If you're starting out worship, say, Dear Lord, be with us through our worship. Thank you for this day, and shut up. If you're praying for the food, bless the food. Go a little bit more than bless our hands, bless our feet, and now, dear Lord, let us eat. But don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. God knows what's in your heart. Just pray. But sometimes we get so caught up in the prayer that it's not a prayer anymore. It's a presentation. We got to be very careful of that. The hypocrites do it for the attention. They do it for the applause. Oh, that was a beautiful prayer. It wasn't supposed to be a beautiful prayer. It's supposed to be a conversation between us and God. Let it be that. Next, Matthew 6:16. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites, with a sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear to be men to be fasting. Surely I say to you, they have their reward. Now, I'm not going to ask if you've ever fasted, because I believe that's just something between you and God anyway. But if you do that, or anything, let's take the clothing giveaway that's coming up. All right? Are you going to come to the clothing giveaway and just, oh, it's so hot. God, you better love me because I'm out here in the heat. Y'all recognize I worked the clothing giveaway for 2 hours in that heat the other day. Is that what this is about? Is it at attention so that we can tell everybody how great we are because we worked in the heat for the clothing giveaway? I probably just had 4 people back out of the clothing giveaway. They're going, oh, I didn't realize it would be hot. That's not what it's about. It's about us getting to reach out to community and invite people to church and get involved in their lives. But we turn something that is beautiful and godly and Christian into something that is selfish and self-serving. So here 3 times Jesus comes up and says, do not be like the people that do it for themselves. And then he says, because they have the reward. Remember, we're laying up our treasures in heaven, so we're not trying to do it for our glory now. We want our glory later. Then he gets a little more aggressive. Matthew 7:5. He comes out. Now here's that accusation one. He says, hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now I always like to clarify this because I believe this is one of those scriptures that gets twisted and misquoted way too many times. This is not Jesus saying, don't help your brother when they are stumbling in sin. That's not what he's saying. He's saying if you are doing worse than they are with the same sin, don't come up and accuse them. Y'all both got a problem. If you're an alcoholic and you go up to somebody that's having a glass of wine at the restaurant and say, oh, you're going to burn in hell, that's what he's talking about. How dare you sit there and make that kind of comment when you got a beam in your eye with the same problem? Maybe you got the problem. He's not saying if you see somebody caught up in sin, not to go tell them to get out of that sin. He's talking about the problem with accusation. And you all know that this is a problem in the church today. We love to point fingers, don't we? I mean, we love to point fingers. But y'all know the old saying. My dad used it all the time. I use it a lot with my kids. What's the saying? For every finger pointing at you, I got 3 pointing back at me. The accusation can't be denied. We all are struggling with sin. So recognize our place in this relationship with God. It is not my job to condemn anybody, but it is our job to help each other get out of sinfulness. So understand the context here. Matthew 15, 7 through 9. Hypocrites! I don't put the exclamation points here. The Bible did. Well, did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me. Teaching. We'll stop there. In vain they worship me. What's he talking about? See, he's got a bunch of people that are coming to church, pew sitters, right? I'm not picking on anybody in here, I hope. I hope. That's the point. We don't want to just be the bench warmers at church. Don't tell me I'm not a Christian. I've never missed a worship service. Does that make you a Christian? Might give you perfect attendance, but it doesn't mean you're Christian. And that's the point. Oh, they come and they sing the songs, they fold their hands, they bow their head. When it really comes down to being a Christian, they're lacking completely. I've known professional pew sitters. You ask them about God and they have no relationship. Once they walk out that door, God is out of their life till the next Sunday. That's all he is. Mom and dad trained them, or grandma and grandpa trained them, that you go to church on Sunday. It's really bad in the Bible Belt. Those of you know what I'm talking about in the Midwest. Why do they go to church? Because they're supposed to. It's not because they have this great, I don't mean all of them, but they were raised, you go to church or else. That's all they know. They don't know God, they just know church. And that's what he's talking about. Boy, sure they sing the songs, yeah, they bow their heads, yeah, they show up, but the reality is they have no relationship. I think I skipped one there. Matthew 16, 2 through 4. He answered and said to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the time. Now, we've been talking about the signs of time in our Revelation class, and the reality is, we know that not just in Revelation, but in the New Testament, we are told to look for the second coming, of Jesus Christ. But how many of us are actually living our life anticipating the second coming of Jesus Christ? How many really anticipate? You all think about it. Quick poll. If you have auto insurance because you want auto insurance, raise your hand. Nobody? I want auto insurance. If I'm in an accident, guess what? I want to be covered. Some of you might only have it because you have to. What about home insurance? Anybody got home insurance? It's not the law. Granted, if you have a mortgage, you have to have it. Renter's insurance? Life insurance? Why do we get those things? Because we know that things happen and we want to be ready if something does happen, that we are protected, right? The house is paid for, the car is paid for, the wife is paid for. Oh, wait, no, I didn't. But when it comes to our relationship with Jesus Christ, if we have really planned to go to heaven, where is our insurance? What are we doing to assure that if Jesus does come tomorrow, we are all going to be very well taken care of? See, that's the question. We know all the things that are coming up. We can look at Scripture, see the warnings, we see the threats, we see the promises, and yet, what are we doing to make sure that the prize is ours? Matthew 22, 18 to 21. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they brought him a denarius, and he said to them, whose image and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And he goes on, render to God the things that are God. But why does he call him a hypocrite? I mean, do we pay taxes? Well, because the reality isn't that they just want to know if they have to pay taxes. The reality is they want to be able to get out of paying taxes. But if we represent God, the reality is we don't just represent God in holy things. We're representing God out there on the street too. How we behave, how we treat, how we obey the law, how we do all. And as we say, quit trying to get out of stuff. If we are truly the representatives of God, then we abide by the law. If we are truly the representatives of God, then we live a life that when people look at it, they see Christians. But if we're sitting there just trying to walk the line, right? Then really, are we living a Christian life, or are we just trying to get by? How much are we allowed to put your kid? We just got done with camp, right? On the schedule for camp, lights go out at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Well, we allow pranks, and sometimes, especially group 4 kids, they're allowed to get away with some other things. And the girls this year wanted to scare the boys. Are my boys here? I could embarrass them really fast. Let's just say the prank was very successful. And about 12 o'clock, Brittany had warned me that this was going to take place. I knew everything that was set up. There's this really loud pitched series of screams. It was very successful. And then it went quiet. A lot of laughter. Then there was another one right after that because she said we're scaring them twice in a row so they think it's over, but it's not. That was successful too. Then it was quiet. And I'm laying there on my pillow. It's about 12:35. I'm just finally about to fall asleep. And I hear more screaming. And it's so loud because apparently the third one I did know about was even more successful than the first two. But see, the thing is, they had to push the boundary. Now they had waited too late. Now they had gone beyond what they had permission for. And I had to get out of bed and go yell at people. Now that's a funny little camp story, but the reality is we have the same problem with our Christianity. We know where the line is, but boy, we just want to get as close to it as possible and get away with as much as... And the question is, at what point in time are we trying to please God versus trying to please ourselves? I mean, can we truly say we are devoted children of God if we are just trying to get away with all the sin that we possibly can, but yet still make it to heaven? Matthew 23:13. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. This is one of those things I think the Church of Christ has a really bad mark of. So I'm going to pick on us real quick. I get to do that because I'm the preacher. How many times have we eliminated people from being allowed into God's family? We just decide they're not worthy. Or we decide they do too many things. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there's a line that gets drawn in the sand that is very definitive with God. And I'm not saying we don't preach against that. But sometimes the lines we draw are completely different than what God said. It becomes a form of spiritual bigotry. And we better be very careful because that's what he's saying. You don't let yourself in the kingdom, but you won't let anybody else in either. We eliminate ourselves from our own behavior, but then we have to take it even further and try and keep other people out of God's church as well. Well, that's just sad. How many people are getting disqualified. And it's not because they don't want to come to God, it's because they see what Christians are behaving like, and they decide, I don't want any part of that. If that's really Christianity, no thank you. Matthew 23:15. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourself. Now, I've been in a course. I think I've shared some of this. One of the courses, my doctorate is based in global evangelism, so we talk about mission work a lot. But they criticize missionaries a lot. If you go on a 2-week mission trip, they'll tell you all you've done is damage the cause of Christ because you haven't really done anything to help him. You know, if you look at ministry in the Bible, how many missionaries actually stayed put for a long time? Paul was always moving. I mean, most of the stories we have of Paul's missionary journeys over and over, he's always moving. But the modern day view is, you've wasted your time, you've wasted God's money, you've wasted. So they've done so much to try and... But the reality is, it's the doctrine we're winning them to. I had a conversation, a couple of people actually recently, we were talking about the value of mission work. A lot of churches out there boasting about their mission programs and how much money they invest in sending missionaries overseas. But here's the question. If I go overseas and the church gives me $50,000 a year, in some cases they're giving a whole lot more than that, to go over and preach in China or something, and I go over and I preach in China that all you have to do is ask Jesus into your heart, and that is my message for 10 years, and I don't baptize a single soul because I've convinced them that just saying it is enough, how much have I done good for the cause of Christ? See, they can spend all the money in the world to go over there, but if they don't preach the right doctrine, if they don't really take them the gospel and do what it takes to make Christians, then what's the point? And that's why we see these other warnings about be careful if you choose to be a teacher, a preacher, an elder. Because the expectations of God for you is greater because you're the one teaching these people. So all these missionaries going over and teaching this bad lesson, and yeah, they're already lost because they haven't done what it takes to be a child of God in the first place, but then they're going to bring everybody else off the cliff with them. So we got to be very careful of the lessons we're taking into the world. Matthew 23:23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Again, boy, we love to point fingers. We love to accuse. We love to blame. But the reality is, when we look at what Christ was doing, even with all of his hypocrite statements, what was he trying to accomplish? He wanted Christians to behave like Christians. Realize what I have done. A new commandment I give to you, right? That you love one another as I have loved you. Jesus' commitment to love was so great that he gave his life. We just recognized it. So when it comes to truly being the Christians that we're supposed to be, if we don't have mercy, faith, and justice in our line, right? Then what good are we? What's the point? Matthew 23:25, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. And I believe this goes very closely with what we were talking about earlier. It's the pew sitter mentality. Oh, you wear your tie, your pretty dress or whatever, right? Your nice suit. You go to church every Sunday. You talk about Jesus, but when it really comes down to it, you don't behave like a Christian any other time. Oh yeah, you look pretty on the outside, but when it really comes to dedicating your heart to God, it's just not there. Matthew 23:27 and 28, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. Even so you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Matthew 23:29, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. He goes on, but that's the whole thing, right? You sit there smugly and say, if I was back then, I would have never done that. Children of Israel, we study children of Israel a lot here, don't we? How easy would it be for us to say, boy, I can't believe those stupid Israelites. We would never do that. But the question is, how many of you think we actually wouldn't have done that? Anybody complain in the church today? Oh my word. We're expert complainers, grumblers, gossipers. Don't we do it all? So why on earth would we think it would have been different if we were wandering in the desert for 40 years? See, that's the point. Learn from the mistakes. Don't be smug about it. We know we would make the same mistakes because we're still making them. So instead, we embrace the relationship we have with Christ and learn from him. But then in Matthew 24:48-51, it says, but if that evil servant says in his heart, my master is delaying his coming, and begins to beat his fellow servant, and to eat and drink with the drunkards, the master of that servant will come on a day when he is not looking for him, and in an hour that he is not aware of, and will cut him in two and appoint him ... We don't want to know the rest, do we? Anybody really want to hear about the weeping and the gnashing of teeth and the punishment and the hell? Because let me tell you what happens to hypocrites. The same thing that happens to all the other wicked people. Same kind of fate. There's this warning all throughout Scripture of what happens to those that are not truly God's people. those that have not really surrendered to the will of God. We don't want to think about that. We think that we can go on and act the way we do and be as hypocritical as we want and still sing How I Love Jesus. Or I'm waiting to go to heaven, right? All our heaven songs. But the reality is, if we do not learn to be God's true Christian people, there is no heaven. Go over to Matthew 7:21. This is one of those scary scriptures I always talk about. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. See, we're going to have this checklist of things that we think we've done that is going to make God happy, but he's not looking at what we've done as much as what we've done with our heart. So ready to brag, so ready to boast, so ready to point fingers at others. But the reality is, if we do not get away from our hypocrisy, we're in trouble. But I don't want to leave on a bad note. So 1 Corinthians 10:1 through 12. It's a long text. I hope you'll bear with me a second. It says, Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Now if you're wondering why I say that's not a bad note, it's because that is a statement of hope. I can read all about the children of Israel, and I can see their grumbling and complaining, and I can look at that and see it in myself and say, you know what? I don't want to be like that. I can see the prayers of somebody that gets up just for the attention, or I can see the people that do projects just for the pat on the back, and I can say to myself, I don't want to end up like that. I want God to be proud of me. I want the world to see a Christian. I want to set an example that shows them who I belong to. See, we want to focus, and that's the beauty of it, is the reason I believe God gave us the Old Testament and the New Testament, so we can learn of the mistakes of others. See, right now, I hope if you ever go crawling through one of those playlands with your kids, you will wear better pants than I did. Now you have food for thought. I got to dress properly before I go crawling around in the tunnels. Next time you're sitting there talking to your family and you think I'm going to share a story of gossip, maybe you'll look around and realize you got little ears listening that you weren't planning on. And that's not the example you want to lead. Who do we want to be as God's people? Hypocrisy is dangerous. It's not the people. It's the way the people act. It's who we become. The example we set. If you're subject to an invitation this morning, if you haven't been baptized, what are you waiting on? It really is great on this side of the fence. We have hope, we have joy, we have a home in heaven waiting for us. Without that life in Christ, without being baptized, you have none of that. Gloom and doom. At the same time, maybe you're somebody I'm talking to this morning and you realize that the life you've been living, the attitude you've had, the way you've done things, they're not the godly way. And you want to start from scratch. Let's pray for you. Let's get you back on track. If you'd like to be baptized this morning or you need prayers, we invite you to come as we sing our invitation.